You wanna know what inspired this video of all things? The Sopranos. I saw a clip where Tony Soprano was talking about how he thinks the art of war is still applicable today, and that it's better than The Prince. So after having released videos on both The Art of War and The Prince, I think it'd be interesting to do our own comparison and to see which is better. But we need to ask ourselves, better for who and better for what? The Who is one of my favorite rock bands, but the Who for this video is average everyday people. Which book is better for us modern day everymen and women? Now I know Sun Tzu and Machiavelli wrote their books for an intended audience that is not us, and I respect those that want to limit their readings of these works to the author's pure intent. But like it or not, everyday people see and use these books for self-improvement purposes, so we're going to be playing in that realm, so to speak. So we have our who, but what about our what? We'll examine which book is better for the general purpose of achieving our subjective goals. These goals could be moral, immoral, self-improvement related, political, personal, social, whatever. Individually, we all have goals. I feel like reading these two works in relation to how helpful they are in achieving said goals is fairly applicable. Now that we have our ultimate mission stated here, this is how we're going to be judging these two. I'm going to decide which text is better suited to our goal in 3 different categories. 1. General readability. 2. Current day applicability. And 3. Morality. So to start with general readability, I chose to include this because these are 2 old writers, both needing translations into English. And if you're a casual reader just wanting some self-improvement advice, you might get turned off if the reading experience is not that accessible. Looking at The Prince, the main problem is that the first half of the book is not very applicable for the individual. It's political philosophy that explores how principalities come into being, so you'd have to skip the first half of the book. After that, you'll notice that the book is divided up into very short chapters, ranging only a couple paragraphs talking on different issues. Now, Machiavelli uses a historical methodology to back up his points, meaning he'll reference historical events as examples on how his principles are right. If you're unfamiliar with these events, then you might get a little lost. The Art of War, on the other hand, is almost 100% advice given to an individual, so the whole book would apply. Instead of multi-paragraph chapters in The Prince, The Art of War is divided up into chapters containing multiple aphorisms or concise sayings. This personally makes for a very brisk and easy reading experience. And unlike Machiavelli, Sun Tzu doesn't reference historical events but rather relies on general intuition or reason. So you don't need to know anything historically to fully read The Art of War. For these reasons, I'd give the point to The Art of War for being an easier read. Let's now look at current day applicability. The Art of War is admittedly limited when it comes down to what areas of your life it could help you with. It's generally concerned with conflict and how to act in a situation of conflict. Now yes, many of our goals in life could have elements of conflict, but this isn't always the case. Despite this, Sun Tzu's advice is very general and doesn't often invoke the conditions of the world he lived in. Take this quote for example. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. This makes no reference to the specifics of warfare during the Eastern Zhou period, and can just as easily be applied to an office bully today. So despite the limited scope of The Art of War, it's still fairly easy to apply today. As for The Prince, I think the advice extends beyond just conflict into areas on how to live your life in general, with the aim of self-preservation. It covers human nature, fortune, virtues, vices. You get a lot out of The Prince. The downside is that a lot of the advice is very much within the context of a prince, and it's written as such. So I personally feel that a larger leap is made to apply the advice in The Prince to your own lives. Still, I'd say that because The Prince could be used to address issues beyond just conflict, I'd give the point for current day applicability to The Prince. Finally, we get to the last point, morality. I chose to include this because how a piece of advice weighs on your moral conscience affects the probability that you'd actually follow that advice, regardless of how practical it is. It may not be the end-all be-all of what influences our decision, but generally speaking, we'd rather do an action that we consider to be morally good than morally bad. With The Prince, Machiavelli has no problem invoking immoral acts if the situation calls for it. This is best seen in his section where he tells us that we should appear moral on the surface, but always be prepared to be immoral if the situation arises. He's also famous for his claim that, as a ruler, it's better to be feared than loved, and oftentimes to be feared requires you to do some morally questionable acts. Still, this is balanced out by Machiavelli's claim that we should avoid being hated. So although The Prince, in my opinion, is not as morally reprehensible as it's sometimes made out to be in pop culture, it's certainly morally gray. The Art of War, on the other hand, surprisingly has some very moral points. For example, there's an emphasis on not completely destroying your opponent, as seen here. In the practical art of war, the best thing of all is to take the enemy's country whole and intact. To shatter and destroy it is not so good. When you surround an enemy, leave an outlet free. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. And really, although the book is about conflict, I read it as a book about how to avoid conflict and avoiding war as much as possible. So this is not so much a book that advocates bloodshed and warfare, but actually wants to end it quickly. You do have that famous quote that all warfare is based on deception, but would you rather deceive or have soldiers fight to the death? In my opinion then, the point for morality goes to the Art of War, making it ultimately my choice for which book is better for modern everyday people for the purposes of achieving their goals in life. Now my metrics in this video are all just my own invention, so if you think that you have a better way of judging these two books, then feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell button for more philosophy videos. And with that, I wish you all a beautiful rest of your day.